Okay, here we are back again with more Dragon Age 2, and I don't usually like to do, 2 Codex episodes in a row, because I like to spread them out a little bit, but I do want to do some more Codex entries, so bear with me for one more episode. I'll do some more Codex entries, and then I swear the next episode I'll just be playing the game again. So, because there's so many good Codex entries here. So I want to do the history of Kirkwall. I've got here the first four, I think. I don't know if there's another one. But I have 4 of them right now. So I'm going to go through the history of Kirkwall, because it's really fascinating and it gives you a lot of interesting context for what's going on in the game, at the current moment in the game. So yeah, okay. Chapter 1. It's difficult for many to comprehend today, but there was a time when Kirkwall was believed to be the very edge of the world. It was Emirius then, named after its founder, Magister Emirius Cravan, and it was but one outpost on the very fringe of the Tevinter Imperium. There, the Magister's serfs worked the quarries for the jet stone needed for the mighty temples of Minrathous. After a slave rebellion nearly burned the temple to the ground in the great city, it was determined that a center for the slave trade would need to be established well away from the more civilized parts of the Imperium, though this account may be exaggerated, since the notorious Archon Venarius Isar narrowly escaped assassination at the hands of an elven slave at the time. Because the new slave outpost would become wealthy beyond imagining, competition among prospects reportedly took over 20 years to resolve, resulting in great bloodshed in the frontier, well away from the Archon's eyes. Magister took arms against Magister, mostly in the form of small armies of serfs and mercenaries. Over half the slaves in existence allegedly died in these battles before Emirius was finally chosen, thanks to the marriage of Cravan's son to the Archon's daughter. Yeah, that's how it works. Within a mere decade, the mighty fortress was erected on the cliffs where Kirkwall now stands. Over 1 million slaves passed through its gates before the Imperium eventually fell, an unimaginable number by today's standards. The Cravan family itself became patrons of the next 3 Archons, and was one of the driving forces behind the extension of the Imperial Highway into the Ferelden Valley, a move that would cost them considerable political influence after the resistance of the Alamari tribes. Nepotism, guys. It's great. During its height, Emirius was a jewel to rival the mightiest of the imperial cities and the greatest center of civilization outside Tevinter. Except for all the slaves. So, Chapter 2. As the Imperium's borders slowly receded after the devastation of the First Blight and the subsequent barbarian invasion, many outposts in the area, known today as the Free Marches, were cut off from centers of power. Numerous warlords tried consolidating the region into a single kingdom, but resistance prevailed. Emirius held out for almost a century until it fell to a slave revolt in 25 Ancient. It was not the first such revolt Emirius suffered, but it was the last. It started when an Alamari slave named Radun began earning popularity and power by pushing for better conditions. Radun's growing influence prevented the Magisters from touching him, but eventually they had him poisoned. Furious, a group of Radun's supporters stormed the gallows and were massacred, and so began a bloody year-long rebellion. I am Spartacus! Oh wait, wrong fictional event. Though I'm not sure. Spartacus is kind of legendary, but it's possible that he really existed in some form. The city burned, and wealthy Hightown was sacked. The Magisters hung before cheering crowds. Emirius assumed the new name of Kirkwall, Kirk, meaning black, after its jetstone cliffs. The new city plunged into anarchy for over a decade, and its defenses fell into ruin. Kirkwall has been conquered many times since, the city's own independence suffering since the freeing of its slaves. So yeah, we're gonna hear about some of those conquerings, because why not, right? So, Chapter 3. The Qunari first thundered into Kirkwall in 756 Storm during the last of the new Exalted Marches. The collected nations of Thedas were attempting to drive the Qunari from the northern mainland once and for all. Qunari armies were on the retreat, but in a desperate gamble, their fleet circled around the Amaranthine coast and landed a great force near the Marcher city of Ostwick. Their plan was to overwhelm the Marcher cities of Starkhaven and Kirkwall, Starkhaven to block the roads leading north, and Kirkwall to block ships on the Waking Sea coming from Orlais, all in an effort to deny supplies to the Thedas armies assaulting Ravain. The attack on Starkhaven eventually failed, but Kirkwall was attacked in a daring night raid where the Qunari used their leashed Sarabas mages in an unprecedented display of sorcery. The walls were torn down and the city was taken, and for the next 4 years, Kirkwall endured the most brutal occupation in its history. Writings from that time are scarce. It was not until after the city was freed that the Qunari's deeds came to light. Children taken from families, forced conversion to the Qunari religion, and brutal labor camps. It's ironic that the old slave quarters of Lowtown, still intact after centuries, provided the perfect means for the Qunari to control the city's people. When the famous Orlesian chevalier Sir Michel Lafay rode into the city after finally defeating the Qunari defenders, he wrote, "Kirkwall is full of people with empty eyes that have had all independent thought driven from them." When Lafay was appointed the city's first viscount by the emperor in 760 Storm, he made it his mission to undo the religious conditioning. The Lafay bloodline remained popular enough that when the city finally rebelled against Orlesian rule in 805 Blessed, Viscount remained the enduring title for Kirkwall's rulers, despite its origin. Sorry, my cat is performing her semi-regular cameo on my Let's Play channel. Alright, so Chapter 4. So, we've seen Kirkwall go through being a slaver city, and then it was occupied by the Qunari, and then it was occupied by Orlais, and then eventually declared its independence from Orlais. The Threnhold family assumed its foreboding control of the city at the very onset of the Dragon Age, less than a week after Merrick Theron retook the Ferelden throne from Orlais. Since this was followed by a civil war in Antiva, the much-maligned Three Queens era, and a coup in the Tevinter Imperium, many thought that the Dragon Age would bring devastating change. Perhaps this was a hasty estimate, but it was true for Kirkwall. Viscount Chivalry Threnhold was a vicious thug who took power through a campaign of intimidation, and his son Perrin, who succeeded him in 914 Dragon, was even worse. Taxes were crippling, and Perrin Threnhold used the ancient chains extending from the twins standing at Kirkwall's harbor, unused since the new Exalted Marches, to block sea traffic and charge exorbitant fees from Orlesian ships. The Empire threatened invasion following the closure of the Waking Sea Passage, and for the first time the Chantry used the Templars to pressure the Viscount. So this is a good point of reference for why the Templars have so much power and influence in Kirkwall when they probably shouldn't. Basically, the Viscount was being a dick, and the Chantry said, hey, you gotta stop being a dick, and in order to do that, they actually made use of the Templar hierarchy in Kirkwall to do that. That was probably a bad move in hindsight, even though it worked for him in the immediate crisis. Alright. Okay. So until that point, the Templars had done nothing to counter the Threnholds, even though, as the largest armed force in Kirkwall, they could have. Knight Commander Guyleon's only written comment was in a letter to Divine Beatrix III. "It is not our place to interfere in political affairs. We are here to safeguard the city against magic, not against itself." Which is a fair stance to take. That's indeed what the Templars are for. They're not there to be a sort of worldly source of military force. They're not there to be used for political means or military means. They're there to protect against magic. That's it. The Divine, as a friend to the Emperor, clearly had other ideas. So in response, Viscount Perrin hired a mercenary army, forcing a showdown with the Templars. They stormed the gallows and hung Knight Commander Guylian, igniting a series of battles that ended with Perrin's arrest and the last of his family's rule. The Templars were hailed as heroes, and even though they wished to remain out of Kirkwall's affairs, it was now forced upon them. Knight Commander Meredith, Guylian's replacement, appointed Lord Marlo Dumar as the new Viscount in 921 Dragon, and she has remained influential in the city's rule ever since. So basically, the current ruler of Kirkwall, right, Lord Marlo Dumar, he is Viscount because Knight Commander Meredith made him the Viscount. Because of all of this weird string of events that led to the Templars basically taking a political stance when they, were never intended to do that. So this explains, because the game itself never really goes into detail about why the Templars are as powerful as they are in Kirkwall, when Templars, we've never really seen Templars take on any kind of genuine political power before. And, their role is pretty explicitly apolitical, right? They're a religious group that serves, the Chantry in a very specific purpose. But in Kirkwall, this weird string of events with the Perrins and the Chantry and dealing with Orlais led to the Templars having a lot of power and influence in the city. Not necessarily by any choice. It's not like Meredith woke up one morning and said, you know what? I want to be the power behind the throne in Kirkwall. Like, that's really not what she ever set out to do. She's a Templar. She's here to be a Templar. Whatever else she is, she's not, she doesn't seem to ever really be all that interested in the power that she's attained. But she has certainly made use of it when it's served her purposes. And, it's not like it wasn't any particular, characteristic of Meredith that got her to this point. It's just that she happened to be second in command when Guylian was murdered. And when he was lynched, that was a big deal, and she had to react to it somehow, and that was, that sort of required her to take a political stance. So, yeah, that's why. So the current Viscount, Marlo Dumar, he's the Viscount right now at this point in the game. The reason why he is the Viscount is because Knight Commander Meredith made him the Viscount. So basically, the Templars, they are the power in Kirkwall, as has been stated a few times in the game, but now we understand why they are, and it's because of this. It's because of these events that have made the Templars so powerful, and Meredith in particular is essentially, Dumar, as we'll see, Dumar is kind of he's not a very good ruler. He's not a terribly effective ruler. He doesn't really, and we learned some of this in sort of extant lore stuff. Marlo Dumar never really wanted to be Viscount. He's not really a particularly good Viscount. He's pretty meek and timid, and he's not really interested in wielding that kind of political power, and he's not very forceful as a ruler. He is basically a puppet of Meredith. He basically is. And she has essentially blackmailed him to the point where she says jump and he says how high. So there's not a lot of room for maneuverability right there because of how influential Meredith is and how much power the Templars wield. So there we go. Let's look at the Kirkwall City Guard. It is with pride that I, your Viscount, grant the authority of law and civil enforcement upon the guardsmen of an independent Kirkwall. No more will we defer to the will of foreign troops or draw a holy order into tasks unbefitting their mandate. These proud men and women will be of the people and will enforce the laws we have elected for a civil and ordered society. And should the specter of invasion return, the noble guardsmen will conscript from the population, for who better to amass the people's will than the constables of law charged with its inspection? This is a great day, fair Kirkwall, and I am honored to appoint the first guard captain. Long may he serve the will of a free people. So this is a speech of the first Viscount of Kirkwall, Michel Lafay, who founded the city guard. And this, of course, is the city guard that Aveline is going to be guard captain of, which is cool. I don't know what this is exactly. No, Eileran. It's an elvish tale, I guess. I don't know that it really has much to do with anything. The Maker's first children is, of course, about the spirits of the Fade, right? Those are the Maker's first children. The Sermons of Divine Renata I. The weakness of mortal will is the great failing of all the Maker's children. We trade our honor as if it were the cheapest of currency. We do not understand what integrity is, or what it is truly worth. From this ignorance, original sin was born. At some time, each of us has thought, what does it matter if I keep hold of my integrity? I am but one mortal. I am powerless. How blind we all are. The virtue of a single slave destroyed the Tevinter Imperium. The dishonor of one man drove the Maker from our sight. I tell you truly, nothing but the integrity of our hearts will win the love of the Maker back to us. It is all the power we shall ever possess to change this world for good or for ill. Alright, so here's a study of the Fifth Blight. This is a little bit of a rehash of Dragon Age Origins, because of course Dragon Age Origins is the story of the Fifth Blight. But there's some interesting aspects to this particular Codex entry because of the fact that it's, again, in-universe. So it's an in-universe rehashing of the events of Origins from the perspective of an outsider. So yeah, while some of my contemporaries dispute whether the Fifth Blight was a true blight or merely a large darkspawn resurgence, historians agree that it began in the swamps of the Qunari wilds on the southeastern border of Ferelden in the year 930 Dragon. King Caelan Theron was swift in responding to the threat, gathering the royal army, every Grey Warden in his country, and sending a call for aid to the Ferelden nobility. The assembled armies laid a trap in the ruins of Ostagar, hoping to crush the force before it reached civilization, but they failed. Darkspawn overran the defenders of Ostagar and decimated the king and his army. They continued their advance into Ferelden unopposed. Only 2 Grey Wardens managed to escape the slaughter, and somehow they came into possession of ancient treaties which compelled the races of men to join arms against the massing horde. So yeah, the surviving wardens made their way to Kinlochhold, home of the Ferelden Circle, and conscripted the mages. In desperation to find more allies, the wardens journeyed into the Brazilian forest, seeking the Dalish. The elves, too, joined the growing army. Into the deep roads, the surviving wardens went, searching for Paragon Branca in hopes she could settle the unrest in Orzammar and unite the dwarves in the battle against the archdemon. Branca could not be located, but another paragon was found, the legendary Caridin, who forged a crown that ended all question of succession. Balin Aeducan was crowned king of Orzammar, and the dwarven armies marched for the surface. So this is a quick recap of the decisions and origins, right? There's going to be some more later. Obviously, this is volume 1. There's going to be some more later. Well, let's look at the Amell family, because this is interesting. This is actually from a letter, about the Amells. So it's just sort of noble gossip, right? So it's truly sad what happened to the Amells, isn't it? I still remember grandmother talking about the balls that Lord Aristide used to hold at their estate, and the Antivan violin players and dancers from Afsana. No expense was spared, and no one would dare miss it, lest someone think they weren't worthy of an invitation. And then poor Revka had the child. Magical talent, running in one of Kirkwall's most prominent families. The Templars had considered Lord Aristide to be Viscount after Threnhold's arrest. Can you imagine the scandal had he been chosen? They whisked the child away to the Circle, and the Amells simply had no luck after that. Leandra ran off with a Ferelden mage, and then Damien was accused of smuggling. Poor Lord Faustin almost bankrupted his family trying to get the charges dropped, but I hear Viscount Marlowe simply wanted the Amells out of the picture. And it worked too, didn't it? By the time Lord Faustin got sick, there was only young Gamlin left and a mountain of debt. I spoke to Dolce just the other day, and apparently Gamlin is now living in some low-town shack. Sounds like the sort of character you'd cross a street to avoid, and let's not even talk about the estate. Mother says we should remember the Amells because that sort of thing could happen to any of us. You know the old saying, a marcher's fortune rises and falls with the tide. If you ask me, this is just another misfortune that magic brings to honest folk. Andraste help that poor family, whatever lies in store for them. So yeah, the Amells, of course, if you followed my Dragon Age Origins playthrough, I played a human female mage in Origins. And she was an Amell. She is, in fact, one of Revka's children, right? The child that they mentioned, the magical child that Revka Amell bore. That's my warden. That's the warden, the human mage warden in Origins. So yeah, the Amell warden is, in fact, a cousin of Hawk. And I've always really liked that. It's one of the reasons why I play a human mage in Origins. I've also played the elf mage Origin, but I like the human mage just a little bit better for this one reason, and that's that they're related to Hawk. That's literally the reason why I prefer the human mage to the elf mage, because there's no other difference really between the two. Some people, are a little bit racist to you as well as being weird about the magic thing, but other than that, that's the only difference, is that the human mage is an Amell and is related to Hawk. So I have just always liked that. I think that's kind of cool. And an interesting tie-in with these two characters. Fortunately or unfortunately, the human characters and the human protagonists of Inquisition do not bear any relation that I'm aware of to the Amells and the Hawks, though they are free marchers. So, there you go. Free marches, they produce a lot of interesting stuff. We know about Valisleen, the blood writing. Those are the tattoos that the Dalish elves have on their faces. I want to look at... I'm not going to do all of these, because, wow, there's a lot. And not all of them are necessarily really super relevant to what we're talking about. So, alienage culture is maybe interesting, but, I don't know that I necessarily need to read you about alienage culture. Here's some interesting stuff on Arlathan. Before the ages were named or numbered, our people were glorious and eternal and never changing. Like the great oak tree, they were constant in their traditions, strong in their roots, and ever reaching for the sky. They felt no need to rush when life was endless. They worshipped their gods for months at a time. Decisions came after decades of debate, and an introduction could last for years. From time to time, our ancestors would drift into centuries-long slumber, but this was not death, for we know they wandered the fade in dreams. In those ages, our people called all the land Elvenhan, which in the old language means place of our people. And at the center of the world stood the great city of Arlathan, a place of knowledge and debate, where the best of the ancient elves would go to trade knowledge, greet old friends, and settle disputes that had gone on for millennia. But while our ancestors were caught up in the forever cycle of ages, drifting through life at what we today would consider an intolerable pace, the world outside the lush forests and ancient trees was changing. The humans first arrived from Parvalin to the north. Called Shemlin, or Quicklings, by the ancients, the humans were pitiful creatures whose lives blinked by in an instant. When they first met the elves, the humans were brash and warlike, quick to anger and quicker to fight, with no patience for the unhurried pace of elven diplomacy. But the humans brought worse things than war with them. Our ancestors proved susceptible to human diseases, and for the first time in history, elves died of natural causes. What's more, those elves who spent time bartering and negotiating with humans found themselves aging, tainted by the humans' brash and impatient lives. Many believed that the ancient gods had judged them unworthy of their long lives and cast them down among the Quicklings. Our ancestors came to look upon the humans as parasites, which I understand is similar to the way humans see our people in the cities. The ancient elves immediately moved to close Elvenan off from the humans for fear that this quickening effect would crumble the civilization. So this is as told by Gisharel, keeper of the Ralaferan clan of the Dalish Elves. So again, this is the Dalish Elves' own oral history of how they think they used to be before, everything bad happened to them. So put a pin in this. Because we'll probably come back to it eventually. Maybe not in this game, but eventually. Put a pin in it. So yeah, in the Dalish, we know the Dalish are, sort of the nomadic elves that have broken with humans and they keep to the outskirts. The Carta, yeah. So the Carta is an interesting institution, I guess, for a number of reasons. So let's look at this Codex entry. The castless dwarves of Orzammar have few prospects. Consigned to live in a crumbling ruin on the social and economic fringes of the mighty dwarven capital, most resort to begging, prostitution, or crime. Just as all rivers eventually join the sea, all castless who turn to crime eventually become part of the Carta. The hero of Ferelden decimated the ranks of this ancient gang while rallying the dwarves to join in the battle against the archdemon Erthemiel. Unable to recover the power they once had in Orzammar, they turned their attention topside, using groups of surface-dwelling dwarves to smuggle weapons, lyrium, surface luxuries, people, and other goods between Orzammar and human lands. Despite the flow of business, its members are still desperate and violent. With no strong leader to rein in their excesses, they have little sense of dwarven honor and freely break their word, double-cross allies, and renege on deals. So yeah, that's what's happened to the Carta since Ariadne Amell went through and murdered everybody. So here's a fun bit. The Enigma of Kirkwall. We've already found a few of these. I think there's maybe a couple more that I'm going to be able to find later on in the game. The Enigma of Kirkwall is one of those Codex entries that is indeed an enigma. It's never really fully explained. It never becomes a major plot point. It's just kind of there in the background, making things even stranger in Kirkwall than you might even imagine. So yeah, let's read this just to see what we got. The Viscount is suspicious, but the bribe was sufficient to gain access to the restricted section of the archives. The money would have been better spent elsewhere, the archives being almost devoid of Imperium-era records. When the slaves revolted, they hunted magisters and burned the city, at least the parts that could be burned. One account says that the streets were littered with piles of scrolls and books set aflame. Is our quest futile? Did the slaves destroy the answer? As Mafarath's armies toppled the Imperium, they sent 3 magisters and their legions here. They never arrived. But why march here of all places? What were they coming here for? So this is found behind a panel with curious markings, signed the Band of 3. And another one. In the back alleys of Lowtown, you can find extraordinary things. Priceless tomes of knowledge can be bought with a handful of gold. The Chant of Archon Levias, a whole chapter of the Midnight Compendium. Some of these books were thought lost forever. And these are no forgeries. I've verified their authenticity myself. The fences have no inkling that what they're selling has value. Where did these books come from? After several failed attempts, I got my answer underneath the city. There is a hive of hidden passages in Kirkwall's sewers. Now and then a lucky sewer rat comes across an unlooted chamber, and then a cache of ancient Tevinter relics spreads through the black market. We must search below the city. So that was found underneath a cobblestone with curious markings, faintly glowing. It is signed the Band of 3. So, we have some interesting things going on in Kirkwall. The Lomarin Accords is another interesting Qunari Tevinter thing that exists that we might want to be aware of. 50 years. That's how long it took the Imperium to drive out the Qunari occupation, but the rest of northern Thedas was not so lucky. Both divines, white and black, declared exalted marches, and for the only time since the schism of the Chantry, they worked together. A century-long siege resulted, with the giant Qunari entrenched in Antiva and Ravain, and all of Thedas throwing armies against them. The war drained the resources of every nation in Thedas, leaving most on the brink of collapse. For the giants, it did not appear to be the damage to their armada or the loss of their soldiers, but the terrible toll upon the Ravaini population that prompted their retreat. When the third New Exalted March had all but massacred the people of Qunari without even chipping the Qunari occupying force, the giants finally withdrew. The treaty that put an official end to the Qunari wars was signed on the politically neutral island of Lomarin off the southern coast of Ravain. 150 years after their assault on the mainland began, the Qunari left our shores. They received the northern archipelago in exchange for cessation of hostilities against all the nations on the Accord. Only Tevinter refused to sign, and so the war continues to rage in the Imperium to the present day. It's worth noting, however, that the Kingdom of Ravain immediately violated the treaty, twice. Once, when humans of northern Ravain, nearly all practitioners of the Qun and therefore by definition Qunari, refused to leave their homes and go in exile to the islands. And again, when the Ravain Chantry and nationalist forces, unable to convert its people back to the worship of the Maker, try to purge by the sword, slaughtering countless unarmed people and burying them in mass graves. It's a fortunate mystery that the leaders in Qunari did not alert their allies in the Northern Passage, or we'd still be fighting the giants now. So that's an interesting thing to note, that there is technically a peace treaty between the Qunari and all of Thedas except the Tevinter Imperium, with whom technically the Qunari have remained at war for like 300 years. Technically, the Tevinter Imperium and the Qunari are at war and have been at war for 300 years. And technically there is a peace treaty that prevents war between the Qunari and everybody else. How much longer that's going to last is anybody's guess. Maybe not that much longer. I'm not going to worry too much about these things, the sort of resources. Except to note that these entries are written by Ines Arancia, who's of course the botanist that we met in Dragon Age Origins Awakening. Yes, the prickly one. So here's just more on the Qunari. The people of the Qun are perhaps the least understood group in Thedas. The Qunari wars were brutal, but so was the Chantry Schism. So was the fall of the Imperium. Some of this misunderstanding is an accident of nature. The race we call Qunari are formidable. Nature has given them fierce horns and strange eyes, and the ignorant look on them and see monsters. Some is an accident of language. Few among the Qun's people speak the common tongue, and fewer speak it well. In a culture that strives for mastery, to have only a passable degree of skill is humiliating indeed, and so they often keep quiet among foreigners out of shame. But much of it is a result of the culture itself. The Qunari view their whole society as a single creature, a living entity whose health and well-being is the responsibility of all. Each individual is only a tiny part of the whole, a drop of blood in its veins, important not for itself, but for what it is to the whole creature. Because of this, the Qunari most outsiders meet belong to the army, which the Qun regards as if it were the physical body, arms, legs, eyes, and ears, the things a creature needs in order to interact with the world. One cannot get to know a person solely by studying his hand or his foot, and so one cannot truly meet the Qunari until one has visited their cities. That is where their mind and soul dwell. In Saharan and Parvalin, one can truly see the Qunari in their entirety. There, the unification of the Qunari into a single being is most evident. Workers, whom the Qun calls the mind, produce everything the Qunari require. The soul, the priesthood, seeks a greater understanding of the self, the world, and exhorts the body and mind to continually strive for perfection. The body serves as the go-between for the mind, the soul, and the world. Everyone and everything has a place, decided by the Qun, in which they work for the good of the whole. It is a life of certainty, of equality, if not individuality. So that was written by an adherent of the Qun, the seer of Qunari. So that's a really interesting perspective on the Qunari. The general idea with the Qunari is that they are a very communal kind of society, right? So they're completely equal. It's 100% meritocracy, but there's also zero individuality. You don't get to choose your path. It's chosen for you. So it has a certain appeal, but also they are trying to forcibly convert. Their ultimate goal is to forcibly convert everybody to the Qun. So they're militant. They're also a militant communal society. Alright, so let's read about the Raiders of the Waking Sea, or aka the Felicissima Armada. The Raiders of the Waking Sea, or simply the Raiders, is the common name given to an association of Antivan pirates called the Felicissima Armada. These pirates were once little more than opportunists based out of the coastal city of Lomarin that preyed on sea traffic. They were often targeted by Orlesian and Free Marcher cities that were bent on destroying the pirates once and for all. After each such effort, new pirates would appear to fill the vacuum. During the new Exalted Marches, the nations of Thedas needed every ship they could muster against the massive power of the Qunari dreadnoughts. The Lomarin pirates were faced with a difficult decision. They had to band together under one flag and fight with those they had previously preyed upon, or face conversion and annihilation by the Qunari. Thus the Armada was formed. The pirates brought their knowledge of stealth and trickery to bear, plaguing Qunari supply lines and even launching seaborne invasions against the Qunari coast. For a time, it was said the Armada was the premier naval power of Thedas, and after the signing of the Lomarin Accord, they maintained their association, rather than disband as many had hoped. Wealthy merchants now often pay the leaders of the Armada rather than risking their ships commandeered and their merchandise stolen and sold on the black market. The Armada is hardly unified, and bloody battles between Armada leaders are frequent, but when faced with an attack by outsiders, the group instantly puts aside their differences and closes ranks. The raiders have thus become far more of a threat in the last century than they ever were before. There is many a legend told about how dashing and romantic life aboard a raider vessel is, but don't believe it. They are scoundrels and smugglers all. So, that's an interesting perspective on the Felicissima Armada. So let's look at surface dwarves a little bit. We're going to get a little more on this eventually. We're gonna get a little bit more on this, I think, from Varric himself, actually. I think that might be the one on the coterie. But I'm gonna read this one first. This is actually an outsider's view of Dwarven society, so this is interesting too. In Orzammar, Dwarven society is divided into rigid castes with houses that compete for power and prestige, but all that is discarded when a dwarf abandons the stone for the surface. Under the open sky, everyone is equal, or so the story goes. The truth is that thousands of years of tradition are not so easily tossed aside. Even though surface dwarves are officially stripped of their caste, many maintain a hierarchy among themselves along the old caste lines. Formerly noble houses are accorded more respect than casteless brands who come up in search of opportunity. The poorest noble dwarf on the surface looks upon the rich, lower caste dwarves with contempt. Upper-class surface dwarf society is roughly divided into two camps. Kalnas, who insist on maintaining caste and rank, typically those from the noble or merchant caste families, and Ascendants, who believe in leaving Orzammar's traditions underground and embracing life in the sunlit world. So there's some interesting things here, right? So there's certainly some division even amongst surface dwarves as to how they should live their lives, right? And I think this is important. It's good to keep in mind for future reference. Maintaining some tie to Orzammar was seen for generations as the only lifeline for surface dwarves. Bringing surface goods to their kin underground and lyrium and metals to the surface was not only the most lucrative means of making a living, but also a sort of sacred duty, as many surface dwarves willingly accepted exile and the loss of their caste to better serve their house or patron. In recent years, many surface dwarves, particularly Ascendants, have branched out. They started banks, mercenary companies, and overland trade caravans. They became investors and speculators in purely surface trade. These new industries have proven tremendous sources of wealth, but are looked down upon by their more conservative kin. For less affluent surface dwarves, association with a powerful Kalna can open many doors. They can get credit with dwarven merchants and are offered work opportunities by the powerful Dwarven Merchants Guild more readily sometimes than more qualified but less connected individuals. So this is a really interesting point, especially in light of Varric and his position as a surface dwarf. As Varric mentioned, House Tethris was an old noble house, right? But they've been disgraced and cast to the surface. Varric was born on the surface. He never lived in Orzammar. He doesn't care about Orzammar politics. He could care less. He likes the surface. He wants to be a surface dwarf. He has no problem with that. But his brother maybe not so much. This is not Varric's entry. I'm sure Varric has one. I might not have it yet. But this is on the Coterie. The Coterie is slightly different from the Carta, in that the Coterie is primarily a Kirkwall thing. So Kirkwall is built, and it's not a dwarven thing per se. It's a Kirkwall thing. It's basically Kirkwall's organized crime syndicate. So yeah, Kirkwall is built on a solid foundation of greed and human suffering, and its underworld is a place where everything is for sale and everyone is fair game. There are many criminal empires within the city, some of which have been around since the Imperium used Kirkwall as a hub in the slave trade. Alliances, spying, manipulation, betrayal, and open warfare is all commonplace in the never-ending struggle for power. The Coterie is a thieves' guild that has been around for almost a century, but until recently was never a major player in the underworld. Some 20 years ago, the strongest of the local criminal empires was an ancient guild known as the Sabrathan, but its leader was betrayed from within, and during the turmoil the Coterie made a successful grab for power. Since then, they've sunk their claws into almost every level of Kirkwall, including the City Guard, the Dwarven Merchants Guild, and some of the most influential citizens in the city. It's safe to say that the Coterie gets a slice of every pie, and very little goes on in Kirkwall that escapes their notice. Yeah, I don't know if I have it yet or not. I guess not. I don't see it. But that's okay. I'll get it eventually. Basically, Varric has a really interesting Codex entry that he wrote himself about basically how everybody's all of the dwarves are huge hypocrites, and surface dwarves being castless is really silly, and yada yada. It's a really great Codex entry. But anyway, I'm running out of time again, and I still am not, even halfway through all this lore stuff. There's just so much, but that's okay. Next time I will go back to playing the game, I swear, and I'll wait a few more episodes before I dive back into stuff like magic and chantry hierarchy and the circle and apostates and all kinds of stuff like that. So yeah, next time we'll play the game again, I promise. As always, if you like what you see, please like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode. Later!